Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. Lost in Space, no, not that one. Lost in Space, not that one either. Astra Lost in Space is the latest torchbearer in a long line of stories with Lost in Space titles where the main cast of characters are... You get the idea. And frankly, that core concept has obvious appeal. A group of people trying to survive and get home has layers of interpersonal conflict practically baked in. Inventive possibilities with planets and alien life, sci-fi as a genre really can flex some creative muscles while also reflecting on the human experience. Stories that follow these trends tend to be perfect for episodic serials, and so on the whole I have a healthy amount of excitement to see where Astra takes us. And as far as a quick Google search could tell me, it's a completed manga series, so hopefully we'll be getting a full adaptation. As the first episode was a double-length one, there's plenty to talk about, both good and bad across the story so far, so let's jump in and chat about pacing, tropes/cliches, and a personal favorite, letterboxing. The first thing I want to commend Astra for is using the double-length time to adequately pace the plot of the first episode. It didn't feel like information overload, but neither was there a scratching for answers that should have been made clear. The circumstances behind the trip, important character personalities, and the main plot point are all well established before we conclude the episode, without spoiling any important hanging questions like what the hell was that sphere and why was the ship there. If the opening episode doesn't give the audience a core plot thread to hold on to, they'll be left wondering why they're even watching, and so if you just think in your head hypothetically how you'd want the first introduction to all these characters to end, them venturing onwards to try and find their way home is probably the best way to handle it. If there wasn't the double time, you're either left leaving the audience on a cliffhanger after the cast has been consumed by the sphere, or realistically you have to cut out the main source of tension in the episode in Ares' spacewalk and a lot of character introductions at the spaceport. In that regard, from a pure structural perspective, the flash-forward opening I think was well executed here. Simply because it was allowed to simmer for so long in the background that the mundane flight to the planet suddenly has this sense of tension, as something could go wrong very soon. And that doesn't really go away until after they've landed, which is exactly when the new threat appears. I realize it's not always possible to have double the time in the premiere episode, but in this case I think it worked really well and made full use of the time without failing into any of the pacing issues that tend to crop up in these types of openings. What was paced out, though, might not have been the strongest foot forward in that it felt very paint by numbers. I'll be the first to acknowledge that Lost in Space storylines kinda require the characters to get, say it with me now, lost in space, and if that's always the first major plot point, there's not a lot of opportunities for mixing things up. That is, however, not the case for the cast, and what we've seen so far hasn't exactly been inspiring. Friendly airhead, icy genius, pretty boy, shy girl, brooder loner, stubborn older sister, kid in need of protecting / comedic side character. All of these characters, with the exception of Ares, get very little time to break free of their archetypal conventions. So it's for the most part forgivable, and while mediocre, doesn't hamper the overall experience. One of the most important elements in a show like this is the interactions between the cast, and the three larger group chats that we've seen so far, a healthy amount of comedic asides, differences of opinions and personalities, potential for future clashes, seems like the ensemble shouldn't have too many problems. If the dialogue is well written, the ensemble will be a breeze. For our main character, Kanata, who gets most of the focus, he comes off the first episode with a lot more depth. A backstory that explains his personality and his motivations, and a nice twist on the usual senseless bravery found in hero types. To be clear, characters that stick heavily to their archetypes are not inherently bad, neither are tropes or cliches more generally. It's the execution on these things that matter, and Kanata's first introduction, where he comes off as an overeager musclehead, being contrasted by his rational and clever thinking during the rescue, all coming together because of his history and survival situations and the lasting impression of his teacher, I think suggests that we should be hopeful for the rest of the crew to be properly developed as well. As for the plot, we'll have to wait and see. I'm not exactly comforted that I knew exactly what was going to happen during every beat of the spaceport scene, and more or less predicted the events of the rest of the episode after they initially reached the ship, but given that this was mostly set up, I'm willing to overlook it assuming the next few episodes don't scream generic space trip. And that brings us to what longtime fans of the channel already knew I wanted to talk about: letterboxing. I'm forced to hope that this series doesn't go the way of the last time I talked about letterboxing, but here I'm not nearly as excited about it. Most of the episode is letterboxed, which is an interesting decision on its own. It gives it an almost cinematic quality. The letterboxing is broken for space scenes and for some other special moments which visually tell us that these are the important bits of the episode. And I like how naturally the bars shift out to give more space in shots like this one. But here's my core problem. Letterboxing makes up about 80% of the episode by my estimate, which is fine in isolation, but when it's that omnipresent, any special meaning it could have is lost. That's not to say that there is no meaning we can take from it. Space feels more vast because there's more of the frame to take up. But since it's not only limited to outer space, it's clearly not being done for that reason alone. I thought maybe it'd have something to do with feeling claustrophobic, but even in the expanse of a planet, the letterboxing was still there, and even as our characters were panicking in outer space, the frame remained at full. Furthermore, since it's not constant, the occasional switches to proper aspect ratio just make the return to letterboxing feel bad. It certainly achieves the main goal of making the powerful moments hit hard, but that has the inverse effect of making the bridging scenes feel almost irrelevant, even as it's the overwhelming majority of the episode. Also, the fact that flashbacks to Kanata's past and the current day material both feature the exact same framing means that an opportunity to differentiate through the aspect ratio is lost. Though that is admittedly a small point given how visually distinct the flashbacks are through other means. I'm hoping that this is a one-off regarding the use of letterboxing personally. It'd be like a lesser version of the Record of Mongol Invasion filter, not nearly as grating, but similarly detracting from the experience. Another small thing I want to shout out is the cool elements of sound design in regard to space. I'm always interested in how shows and movies tackle sound in space, and the glitchy communicator was a great touch. In fact, the entire opening scene deserves special mention just because of the music, the panicky sounds. It all came together in a really powerful way to produce tons of tension in the opening moments. I also didn't mention the fact that I thought this episode was well directed, with cool visual motifs like the frozen orange and plenty of stunning space shots. So overall, I'm excited to see what Astra Lost in Space has to offer us moving forward. But the thing I want most of all is at least one reference, one moment, to call back to the other Lost in Space with the famous
"Danger, Will Robinson! Danger! No, Will Robinson! Danger!"